They were horrified that there might not be this particular kind of regulation of the labor market. So the U.S. government spent a lot of money, a lot of people to try to, again, make, and unfortunately they succeeded. So that's the U.S. government. Anybody think it's interested in freedom? I mean, it's just total baloney. Always remember when the government talks about freedom, when the government talks about democracy, what both those words mean in the words of the U.S. government and its affiliated media and so forth is rule by the U.S. government. If a country is free, that means it's ruled by the U.S. If it's unfree, it's not ruled by the U.S. If it's democratic, the elections have come out the way the U.S. wants. If the wrong people are elected, that's not democratic. So this is, again, part of the propaganda of the U.S. empire, which we should never forget is the biggest, richest, most powerful government in the history of the world by many magnitudes. I mean, forget Hitler or Stalin or the Roman Empire or whatever. This bureaucratic apparatus of death and theft is by far the biggest ever to exist. And also, I would argue, for that reason, far more vulnerable than any that has ever existed, because there are all kinds of trouble, as Mises and others have shown, with the bureaucratic system. And when you get a system, when you get a bureaucracy the size of the U.S., it's why they can't do anything right anymore. It's why they, with all their troops and all their money, they have trouble maintaining 150,000 soldiers in Iraq. Whereas in the LBJ days, they had no trouble maintaining 600,000 or 700,000 troops in Vietnam. And part of the reason was they had a draft, but they don't dare have a draft today. So they can't build themselves a decent memorial. I don't know if you've seen the World War II memorial, the FDR memorial, the other memorials that have been built in recent years in D.C. They're all ugly and awful and ineffective, as versus the evil, say, Lincoln Memorial, but it's a very effective temple to the government and to the god Lincoln. They're not able to do that stuff anymore. Look at Katrina. I mean, they can't help but make fools of themselves. Look how badly they do in Iraq. Of course, they murder 1 million people. And all the military-industrial complex and Cheney and Bush families and the Carlyle Group and everything are all making big bucks. But they actually are far less effective than they used to be, and they're actually far more vulnerable. So if we can ever start to change the climate of opinion, which is my view, where we should always be oriented versus trying to elect some bird to office, then I think, we actually have a chance. I should add that I exempt Ron Paul from this, because if you notice Ron's campaigns, whether as a congressman or recently when he ran for president, are all educational campaigns. Justin Raimondo has a great article in TakiMag.com on different strategies, and the Ron Paul strategy, which comes from the Murray Rothbard strategy of trying to reach the people with a radical message, telling them the truth about economics, about central banking, about war, about taxes, and all the other government ripoffs. So that's, Ron is not in it for power. He's in it to change the climate of opinion. So that's a very different thing from, of course, the vast majority of people who run for office want to rule other people. Therefore, they're evil and very bad guys.
Well, it seems like so many of these insights come somewhere along the lines from Mises and from Rothbard. And what is it exactly about Austrian economics or the individualist principles involved that make all this seem so clear? I mean, most people, Lew, have an entirely different set of moral standards for the state than a libertarian like you has. What exactly is it about Austrian economics that seems to make all these complicated truths seem so simple?
Well, I would say that, first of all, there's a big background to Austrian economics. I mean, there were great people working. Murray Rothbard writes about this in his History of Thought, but some of the late scholastic thinkers who were really the first economists. Many great champions of liberty in the past. But with Mises comes really the first full understanding of how the economy works, and what brings human flourishing and what brings human prosperity and what works against it. And then you add Rothbard to that, who was really the founder of modern libertarianism, and his strategic thinking and his he was such. I mean, really, everything I say, I could say, as Murray Rothbard pointed out. I mean, like every word out of my mouth, I could say that, or as Ludwig von Mises pointed out. But Murray, was the first to, again, to, say the government, look, the government's a band of thieves. They're stealing from you. That's what, of course, it's a band of thieves writ large, as he said. So it's or his point that, the essence of the state is that it's allowed to do things that are criminal if done by people in the private sector. Why should they? Why does something that's criminal, if you or I do it, kill, kidnap, steal, all of a sudden become the heroic, draft and war against terror and taxation for the public good or whatever, once I put on a government suit? And, of course, it doesn't change its moral qualities, only it's far worse. I mean, there's no private criminals who have ever done anything the equivalent of George Bush. I mean, the whole mafia, which by and large, of course, is actually involved in providing services people want to buy. That's another way they're different from the government. But think of all the actual criminals in the world. I mean, the actual burglars and, I apologize, I can't remember how many murders we have, every year in the United States, but it takes quite a while before you would get to 1 million murders. Bush has killed 1 million people, murdered 1 million people in Iraq, in the last 5 years in his war. That's not counting the people he's murdered in Afghanistan. That's not counting all the assassinations of his CIA and so forth all over the world. So that government officials are just like hyper criminals. They're burglars and rapists and murderers and thieves. But they're glorified, and you bow down to them, and they should rule us. They have a right to rule us, and don't you dare say no. Just give them all your money and your kids, your property, your schools, your homes, your businesses. Give them control over every aspect of your life. And again, always in back of everything the government does is the gun. They've always got a gun to your head. It's always do it, or we're going to put you in jail, resist, and we'll kill you. In fact, the government reserves the right to itself to kill you if you sufficiently resist paying a parking ticket. So this is the nature of the government. It's a criminal enterprise, and I would say that Rothbardianism and Austrian economics, it does help you see this in the most clear way. And I can't recommend enough that people read Murray Rothbard if you want to know about freedom. And on Mises.org, MISES.org, many of Murray's books are there for free for the reading in PDFs. I've got many of his articles. War, Peace, and the State is, as Tom Woods pointed out today at a program we're holding here at the Mises Institute, that this is a life-changing article. I mean, you never are the same after you read this article on the nature of state and war. That's on LewRockwell.com, and just look at the Rothbard archive. Pick any of his articles. He was such a compelling writer, such a persuasive and interesting writer that you're just drawn right in. This is not hard reading. I mean, it's exciting and life-changing. And again, if you want to enlist in the great battle of our times for freedom and against the state, Rothbard is your essential weapon.
Well, your protege and an intellectual descendant of Rothbard, Anthony Gregory, made a great point this last weekend, I thought, when he said that there really is no such thing as the public sphere or public power at all. That, again, going back to Mises and man acts, everybody is an individual, and everybody in government is still just a person. As you said, they're all looking out for number one, and that really, it's just a myth that there's even such a thing as the public sphere at all. It's all private. It's just some of us have, a flag we can cloak ourselves in and go around and stick everybody up.